Good morning. I'd like to continue our studying together with Song of Solomon today. Solomon wrote this book probably in the early part of his reign, sometime around 970. And the purpose of the Song of Solomon was to provide Israel with a romance play. And the way this is set up is designed to give us pictures of Solomon and Shulamite, and there are courtship days, and then the honeymoon, and then problems that are encountered after the marriage. One has to do with the sexual adjustment, the other has to do with in-laws, problems that are very common. So this is a great subject for individuals that are quarantined, because one of the things that Solomon tells us in Ecclesiastes is to live joyfully with the wife that you love, and hopefully while you're working with the coronavirus, you'll have a good time with your spouse. The problems that we encounter with Song of Solomon largely have to do with the literature. For years, different interpreters have taken the Song of Songs and presented it as something between Christ and the church. They symbolize the different parts of it, make it very hard to understand. Another problem with it has to do with the theology of marriage and the family in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, while not designed by God, intended by God for more than one wife, that was certainly the habit of a number of the patriarchs, and also David and Solomon. David and Solomon probably violated the Deuteronomy command about not multiplying wives. David had multiple wives, and Solomon had an insane number of wives and concubines. And they were his downfall. In Ecclesiastes, he said he shouldn't have done that. But how can he possibly understand human love when he's had so many wives? That's one of the reasons why we think this may have been early in Solomon's reign. It's also mostly Shunammite's words, not Solomon's. It should be the Song of the Shulamite, not Song of Solomon. But these various scenes all have a single theme that's repeated throughout the book, and that's that spousal love is so intense, people should wait until they're mature to engage in that kind of relationship. So the nature of human love is so intense and so all-encompassing. Don't awaken that emotion, don't awaken that desire until you're able to fulfill it and live properly. So in the first three chapters, well, at least through chapter 3, you have 7 different vignettes, different snapshots of Shulamite. This precedes the wedding, and at the end of chapter 3, you have the wedding itself. The first picture here is Shulamite in the harem. And again, the theological difficulties of harems in your ancient Near East literature. You have messianic psalms that combine these different aspects of experience in life that certainly aren't part of what we understand and experience. It can be beneficial, just by way of side benefit. It can be beneficial in church planning situations. I've been to East Africa more times than I can remember. When you lead someone to Christ and they have more than one wife, what do? Well, you use your Old Testament theology. You teach them that God's desire is that one man, one woman, but that may be their children who are able to fulfill that command. You certainly don't want them divorcing wives when they have multiple wives. So what you end up doing is teaching them, if you have more than one wife, then you must love them all equally. You may not be partial to this one or that one, which would be in keeping with your Old Testament theology of marriage and the family. And then you work towards subsequent generations of one husband, one wife, and a Christian marriage, Christ and his church, and so forth. One church I was working with, they had 30 marriages in 1 year, because in that culture, no one knew who the fathers were of the children. Multiple men, multiple children. And so when these people became believers, they would go and get a license from the state or from the country. And now this person, this man, and this woman, they are recognized as husband and wife, and these are their children. And then they'd have a Christian ceremony and celebrate that as a church. So when you're doing church planning, the Old Testament theology, marriage and the family becomes very valuable. So in verses 1 through 4, she's moved into the harem, and that's the first snapshot you get, and you get introduced to the last part of verse 4, which are the daughters of Jerusalem. These are women who would be singing a refrain or speaking a refrain to what's going on, and the whole insecurity that she feels. Apparently she's black, according to verse 5, like the tents of Kedar. I'm dark but lovely, she says in verse 5. And she hasn't taken care of herself. She's an outdoor girl. And the daughters of Jerusalem, they welcome her in one sense. In another sense, they may maybe making fun of her a little bit about being a shepherdess. You see that in verse 8, in chapter 1, verse 8. In the next verses, you have the king going off to his work, and she's missing him while he's at work. In chapter 1, verse 12, you have a forest walk, and the vineyards of En-gedi and so forth. And then in chapter 1, verse 16, there's a picnic that they're involved with. They're outside. The beams of our house are cedar. So again, these are just pictures of different things, and the exchange between Shulamite and Solomon on these different vignettes is recorded. And then you have a very bad dream in chapter 3. By the way, if you want a printed outline of this, you can go to bethanybible.com and study the Word, and then under Study the Word, there's a Through the Bible series, and you want OT 6, where we're dealing with Solomon's literature. We go all the way through the bad dream, and the final thing we have in this section, from the first meeting until the wedding night, is the wedding. Everybody loves a wedding, and that's in chapter 3, the last part of chapter 3, verses 6 through 11, where they're exchanging their vows, and the king on the day of his espousals has a crown which his mother crowned him, and so forth. So now they're married. Chapter 4, all the way through the first verse of chapter 5, is actually the honeymoon itself. And like great literature, like a great play, it leaves all the stuff out that you really shouldn't pay any attention to, but a husband and wife, and it closes the curtains at just the right time, and it's left to your imagination. But the relationship is consummated. They're husband and wife now, and fully in love with each other. And so chapter 4 deals with the honeymoon. And of course, marriage is like a phone call in the middle of the night. First you get a ring, and then you wake up. So what you have with this next section in chapter 5 all the way through chapter 7 are problems with the marriage. And the first one is a problem of sexual adjustment. Most wives, young women, when they're first married, they can't believe how much their husband eats and how interested he is in physical relations. And so in chapter 5, the first thing that comes up is, I've just labeled this, she has a headache, I have a headache, verses 2 through 8. She really doesn't want to be troubled. Now, in their context, they're not sleeping together in the same room. So Solomon comes and is looking for his bride, and, she just doesn't want to be bothered. It's the middle of the night. And then so he disappears, and That's a problem. She goes and looks for him in the middle of chapter 5. Do the watchmen know where he is? Do the daughters of Jerusalem, can you help me find him? Then you have the makeup here in chapter 5, verse 9. And so they resolve the problems between them. And that actually goes all the way through verse 13 of chapter 6. And you know, Solomon was a knucklehead. He shouldn't have left his wife so quickly. And, you know, he's embarrassed by that. Turn your eyes away from me, 6:5, for they have overcome. He feels guilty for just walking away and leaving his wife without proper attention. But they make up, and that's the important part. Problems in marriage are inevitable, and making up is part of what we have to do. You can get a whole lot of mileage by looking your beloved in the eye and saying, "I am so sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me. Pray with me that I won't do this again." And be kind and loving towards one another, and be forgiving. How many times does God forgive us freely? We need forgiveness, and He gives it to us without any problems, freely, unreserved, just because He loves us. So that's how marriage ought to be as well. And then in chapter 7, of course, the marriage deepens, and they make up for lost time. So the separation, the heart's door closed, and they separated emotionally. They open those. Forgiveness is given and restored, and now it's time to make up for lost time. So wouldn't surprise me if in your relationships during these times when you're locked inside your house because of the coronavirus that you say things you shouldn't have said. Well, start by apologies and then make up for lost time. So that problem of sexual adjustment goes from 5:2 all the way through 7:10. And this last one is in chapter 7 and 8, and it deals with the problems of the in-laws. And it's really interesting. What you find here is that Shulamite up from the valley of Jezreel, northern Israel area, she wants Solomon to take her home. So he doesn't send her, he takes her. And so with all the king's armies and the palanquin and all the stuff that goes with a grand king, he makes his way up to Shulamite's home. And what's really funny about this is when the people of Shulamite see her, they are so excited. They're so excited to see her, and they say, and who's this other guy on her arm? What's this other guy? Who's this other guy? But while he's there, he treats her brothers incredibly well. He sets them up in business, makes them wealthy, takes good care of her family. And the point of this is when you're marrying somebody, you marry them and you marry their family. And that problem that is so typical in husband and wife relationships is resolved by Solomon's wisdom. So the key passage, or the key idea to this book, is found in the reoccurring themes by the daughters of Jerusalem. You see it in chapter 2, verse 7, chapter 3, verse 5, and then again at the end of the whole book here, chapter 8, verse 4. "I charge you, daughters of Jerusalem, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases." So the point of this romance play is telling young people and all of us that marriage is one of those things that is so serious. It is unbridled passion. It is such a deep emotional experience that you should not be involved with that until you're mature. In our generation, we see lots of false starts in relationships, and it's expected that there'll be sexual contact and sexual expression outside of marriage. Biblically, until you're married to someone, that person doesn't belong to you. They belong to someone else, and it's best not to go down that path of physical contact because it is so intense, it is so serious, it is so severe that it should wait for the context of marriage, and that requires a certain amount of maturity. So again, do not waken, do not stir up love until it's the right time. So this is a short play, and you can see the different acts as it goes through with introductions and the shyness and the embarrassment that goes with the early days, to a wedding ceremony, to a honeymoon, to resolving problems after marriage. And I would recommend that you don't go into all of the fanciful interpretations. Let the book stand on its own merit. It's well worth studying, and the Hebrew of it is absolutely beautiful. So enjoy your Sunday. My love to you all. Bye-bye.